We have lots to talk about in today's video, including a potential blockbuster deal around Mitch Marner. The latest talk around Marner sees Vegas being a likely destination. We'll discuss how that could possibly work. Plus, could we see a trade between Winnipeg and Carolina? Both have players that make sense, that are on the trade market, that could benefit each team. We also learned today that Parekh Laine is looking for a fresh start and would like a move out of Columbus. Plus, we have some UFA rumblings around the NHL, more news on the Canadian head coach position for the upcoming international tournaments, Alexander Barkov's health update, plus we have a signing in Ottawa and other details around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to cover today, so let's get started first with the update on the Stanley Cup final between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, the main player we're kind of keeping an eye on health-wise is Alexander Barkov of the Florida Panthers. Of course, the team captain took a hit from Leon Draisaitl in Game 2, left the game in the second period, did not return. It didn't sound good. A lot of concern over injury, missing time, but he was on the ice today for practice. Florida did not travel to Edmonton until today, and they ended up running into several delays. Apparently they're having a lot of storms down that way, and they could not get out when they were intending to. The Oilers had taken off a day early, so they've already been back in Edmonton. They skated in Edmonton here today. So big difference, I guess, when it comes to travel. The Panthers are not expected to arrive in Edmonton until really late tonight on Wednesday night. So the Oilers would have been home, had 2 sleeps in their own bed, whereas the Panthers are going to be traveling and getting in super late. So I'm not sure if that'll play a role in anything or not, but at the end of the day, travel issues certainly don't help matters at all. But right now, things are, I guess you could say, looking promising that Barkov will play. But if it is concussion-like symptoms, I would suspect that, especially after a long flight, that they'll want to reevaluate him, and he'll possibly, skate tomorrow if they have a skate at all after getting in so late. I don't know what their plan will be, but things are looking positive, I guess you could say. I know the Oilers were also worried about injuries. They had lost Darnell Nurse to injury in the last game. According to head coach Chris Knoblauch, they're not concerned at this point over his ability to be available. So sounds like he will be in the game in Game 3 as well. So we will see how things go. I don't know if the travel issues will have an impact on things or not. Other updates around the league, we got a hiring in Boston. They've made another addition to their coaching staff. Addition by subtraction, that is. Jay Leach returns to the Bruins organization as an assistant coach. Of course, Jay Leach was under consideration for a few of the head coaching vacancies around the NHL this offseason. Unfortunately, didn't get any of those roles that he had applied for, but he was in the last 3 years an assistant with the Seattle Kraken staff. So he's certainly been, kind of building his resume after previously working with the Bruins in the American Hockey League head coaching role with Providence. He's had a good run there, got a chance to go to the NHL as an assistant, and now he's back in Boston. Obviously, Joe Sacco gets promoted within the Bruins staff. He becomes the associate coach. John McLean, who had previously worked as a skill development and skating coach, filled in as an assistant coach last year, but he's going back to his other role of skating and skill development, whereas Leach will come on and take a regular assistant coach role, and then Sacco gets promoted. So it's kind of like I said, it's sort of an addition through subtraction, but nobody's leaving the organization. Everybody's kind of gets shuffled around a little bit in that sense. A couple of tidbits in Ottawa. The Senators are actually holding a event this evening for season ticket holders. We did learn that they announced a signing at the beginning of that event. They've signed restricted free agent forward Angus Crookshank, who had a real nice season last year. He was a Belleville Senators All-Star in the American Hockey League. He got called up, played 13 games in the NHL, scored his first goal. Didn't look out of place at all. Looked like he had some real solid games. So I suspect Crookshank will get more of an opportunity next year. It's hard to imagine for sure if he'd be a regular. I don't know, because it is a 2-way contract for another season. I would think that the year after that he's going to be looking for a 1-way deal. So it's going to be a pivotal year for his development. But based on the roster and kind of what you expect to see out of Ottawa this year, I think by next year for sure I can see Crookshank being a regular. But this year I can see him getting more games than last year, kind of working his way up here through the ranks. So 1 year, 2-way deal, gets a little bit more money at the American Hockey League level as well. It's $775 at the NHL and $120K at the American Hockey League. We also learned as well that during the head coaching process, we know that Daniel Alfredsson was kind of talked about as being a candidate. A lot of people wondered if he might talk to the Sens about being interested before they hired Travis Green. And of course, that was a question that was addressed by, I think it was Dave Poulin at this event. And he essentially said that Alfredsson talked to him and said that before he really wants to be, seriously considering a head coaching role, he'd rather be an NHL assistant for, 3 or 4 years, get lots of experience that way, before he'd really want to take that under serious consideration. So I didn't really think Alfredsson, after 1 year behind the bench, would be ready for that. I know when he was first jumped behind the bench last year, some people said, well, Marty St. Louis did it, why couldn't Alfredsson do it? And everybody's got their own different levels of comfort. Alfredsson, like St. Louis head coach, it's not like he didn't have any coaching experience, but it was really just at the lower levels in youth hockey with his children. So, obviously his kids were getting older and he did coach at some, higher youth levels, but that's as far as it went. So nice to hear, though, that he still has he's found a passion for coaching and will intend to stay with the organization and work as an assistant. And maybe someday he will be the Sens head coach. We'll see. Hard to say what happens here down the road. Speaking of coaches, we are expected to get word from Hockey Canada on who will be the head coach for Team Canada at the upcoming Four Nation Face-Off event in this February and at the 2026 Olympic Games. That likely is going to be announced after the Stanley Cup Final, and expectation is it will be Lightning bench boss John Cooper. No big surprise. I think Cooper's a terrific candidate. I do believe last time around, before the NHL had to bail last minute on going to the Olympics, that Cooper, I believe, was going to be the coach in that instance as well. Excellent resume, multiple Stanley Cups on his name, used to dealing with lots of big personalities, lots of high-end talent. So I think he's one of the the best candidates out there. Long tenured NHL coach, one of the few guys that's actually been able to ride out a long tenure with one team. It's not something you see very often nowadays. So certainly we'll see. There was expectations that they might give Cooper the Four Nation Face-Off coaching gig and hold off on making the Olympic announcement until later. But the word is now that they're likely going to offer both roles to him. He was seen with Hockey Canada at the World Championships after his team was eliminated in the NHL playoffs over the World Championships. I know some of his players obviously went over, and he was over there as well, watching, observing, and talking to Hockey Canada. So I would imagine they probably get everything sorted out then. They did mention as well in TSN Insider Trading that Paul Maurice, of course, head coach of the Florida Panthers, 2 years in a row in the final, just might be a Stanley Cup champion here in the next week or so. You never know. He very well likely could be asked to be an assistant coach on this team. He's certainly done a great job in the NHL the past couple of years and has a wealth of experience as well. Some UFA rumblings. I know out of Vancouver, Rick Dhaliwal and Don Taylor on the Donnie and Daly show were talking about some of the pending Vancouver Canuck unrestricted free agents. And Dhaliwal mentions that he wouldn't be surprised one bit if the Maple Leafs have interest in a couple of their players, including defenseman Nikita Zadorov and forward Dakota Joshua. Of course, as we mentioned before, Elias Lindholm, another guy, is not expected to return. It's believed that they're offering 7x7, which really is kind of crazy to be a third-line center anyways. The only way that money's really justified, not that he's not worth the money, because I think he is, but unless he's going to be a winger for like Pettersson or playing the top two lines, you can't have a third-line player making $7 million with the cap the way it is. There's just no way. Look at all the top teams around the NHL. Their third-line centers, all the top teams are maybe $2-3 million, sometimes less. You get the odd one making more than that, but those are usually teams that wish they were having a center making less money in those cases, So at the end of the day, the Lindholm re-signing doesn't really make sense. I think there was some talk in the early stages of the acquisition. He was going to be a winger for Pettersson. That didn't really work the greatest, so it doesn't make sense really in that to return. Zadorov, I think, does make a lot of sense for him to return. I think they will continue trying. Joshua, there's been some rumblings he's going to get $3 to $4 million, and if that's the case, I just don't think Vancouver is willing to go there. That's too much. If he'll take maybe 2.75, 2.8, 2.9. I think Vancouver would love to have him back. I think the player that Rick Tocchet really likes. But they can only go so high. It's just that simple. And if it's going to be $3 to $4 million, I honestly don't see the Leafs being able to afford it either. Would they be interested? Sure, I can understand where Dollywall is coming from, that the interest would be there. I don't think they can honor that kind of contract as well. Zadorov, we heard 5 times 5, maybe more. I don't know. But we know Brad Treliving signed Zadorov in Calgary. There's certainly an interest there too. And they were one of the teams talking to the Flames about getting him at the deadline. So if anybody, I think maybe Zadorov could maybe end up in Toronto. Hard to say. We know that the Leafs, according to Elliot Friedman, are going to want to add at least a couple defensemen throughout the offseason, ideally through free agency, unless they make a trade where they acquire one. But, Timothy Liljegren's another name that's been out there in the trade market as well. That they may need at least 2, maybe more defensemen to kind of rejig things here on the back end. Obviously, Zadorov is a name that's out there for sure, which could make sense, for Toronto, but obviously it will boil down to money because they have their own internal issues to take a look at as well. Friedman's reporting that when it comes to Domi and Bertuzzi, like they've been having a lot of talks with both sides here to try to see if they can keep both those guys in the mix. They would like to if they can, but Friedman's saying that term is likely going to be the issue. Both guys want term. And the Leafs they're not that they're not willing to give term, but they're just a little skeptical on how much term they're willing to give, I guess you could say at this point. So that's going to boil down to whether or not it works. Term will be a bigger issue, more so than money. But they are talking to Bertuzzi and Domi and have interest to retain both players if they're able to work that out. Another note as well, one of the top prospects from the 2024 NHL draft from the Saginaw Spirit Memorial Cup champion, Parekh, was named today OHL and CHL Defenceman of the Year. That's certainly a nice award in addition to his resume right before the draft. I know he's a player that many have ranked top 5 to 7 spots. Hard to say exactly where he goes. Really boils down to what everybody feels in the top 5, 6, 7 spots. I think he's probably going to go 5, 6, 7 range, but it's hard to peg exactly. He's right shot. Obviously has a ton of skill. Put up 90 points in the OHL this year. Defensively, there could be some improvements for sure, but a lot of these guys, you could say the same thing. He's just a special talent to how he plays, anticipates, and just reads the play, and hockey IQ, it's off the charts. So Parekh will be a special player, and certainly another nice, like I said, addition to his resume, OHL and CHL Defenseman of the Year. Now, as I mentioned, on a trade rumor front, a couple of players we want to talk about before we get into the Marner situation. Of course, because Elliot Friedman was on a recent Leaf-based podcast talking about Marner, mentioned Vegas, so let's kind of get everything kind of rejuvenated here again. But another name to watch, we talked all about Nick Ehlers, we talked about Marty Necas, and there's some talk through TSN Insider Trading that those two teams are possibly going to be dealing with each other. I mean, it's possible the deal could work out for both sides. When I talked to Necas, Pierre LeBrun of TSN made mention of about 4 or 5 teams that had interest, and he mentions the Winnipeg Jets and the fact that Nick Ehlers is also in a similar predicament with them. 1 year left on his contract. Now, Necas is a pending RFA, different scenario, a little bit younger, but still a player that would like a fresh start, wants a new scenery, and obviously teams are looking to accommodate if they can, but at the same time want to be careful, make sure they get back the right deal so that their team is still on track. They both had really good regular seasons. They want to take steps forward. They don't want to take steps backwards. So, Necas for Ehlers, maybe not a 1-for-1 deal, but there could be other pieces involved. But at the same time, we do know that it makes a lot of sense, more so for Winnipeg. I mean, they get a winger. They lose a winger in Ehlers if they move him, but they get a guy in Necas who can be a winger and a center. He's got tons of speed, tons of skill. Still hasn't hit his full peak, I don't think. Still hasn't hit his prime. So I think he'd be a terrific addition for the Winnipeg Jets for sure. And for Carolina, if they move Necas to get a top 6 forward and Nick Ehlers back, somebody with that kind of speed who can play with some of their top guys like Svechnikov and Aho, etc. To me, he could be a real nice fit there. So not saying that they're going to end up being traded for each other. It's not a given. It's a 1-for-1 scenario. But according to TSN Insider Trading, Pierre LeBrun, both teams going to have interest in the other player. So it makes sense that they could end up having those talks. And maybe that ends up being the trade. We've heard a lot about Necas. He mentions other teams, like Chicago was another team that was come up. We know that they obviously want to add to, kind of bring in some more talent to play with Connor Bedard and take some big steps forward this year, try to be more competitive, better product on the ice, and other teams out there too. So we'll see, but that could be something that works. Also mentioned on TSN Insider Trading that Patrik Laine, who I've been saying for probably a better part of about 2 or 3 months that he needs a fresh start. Well, now it's been noted from him, according to the reporters, that he wants the fresh start and has advised Columbus, that he would like to be traded and to get a fresh start somewhere else, and that the goal here from the team and the player and everyone involved is to make that happen. Now, I wouldn't be completely shocked with Columbus's cap situation that they would be willing to retain some money. Patrik Laine, a former 40 goal scorer, has never really worked out in Columbus. That trade for Laine for Dubois didn't really work the greatest. I mean, Dubois had okay stretch in Winnipeg, better than Laine did in Columbus for sure. But then when the Jets traded Laine to LA, Dubois to LA, they got a great return, and that has really set them up nicely. With Vilardi especially being the main piece coming back there, they did really well. Now Columbus probably won't do so well given the value of Laine has really dropped significantly. But when you get a new GM there in Don Waddell, like I said, he made mention in some of the interviews he's done that they've been rebuilding too long. They need to take steps forward. They need players who want to be there. All those things that we've heard even from the previous regime too. I think that pretty much everything and anything is on the table for the Jackets and Waddell to consider. And if they want to get Laine a fresh start, he's making over $8 million for 2 more years. If you get some salary retained and you knock that down to about 5, and he can find his scoring touch again, even get you 30 goals, that's a pretty darn good contract. He's still young enough that for a team to acquire him for a good price, get him trade while his value is low, get some money retained, rehabilitate him if you can, and maybe you turn into a longer term deal. Maybe he doesn't find it again. It's risky. There's no doubt that he would come with some risk. I think a lot of teams would be open to it, but again, it's going to boil down to what the ask is going to be. From Columbus' standpoint, it's going to be more about getting cap space back and getting a player accommodated, I really believe. So we'll see. There was no teams mentioned that were linked to this player. We had previously heard some talk about Montreal. I wouldn't completely rule that out. I think pretty much any of the teams that are up and coming, I think would be foolish not to at least take a look at this to see, what could we get him for? Could we get him on the cheap? Will they retain money? Is the risk worth it to us? Whether you're looking at Chicago, you're looking at San Jose, you're looking at your Montreals, your Ottawas, all those teams. I think they should all be taking a peek and see what they can do. But do expect them to try hard. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. That Laine, of course, who's been through a lot in the last year with, obviously some injuries and then some time in the player assistance program, to be moved sometime before the start of next year and see if they can accommodate that. Now, as I mentioned, the bigger news today, or bigger comments today, I guess you could say, not that there's really, for sure anything that's close to happening at this point, because it's probably not, but, Mitch Marner maybe ended up in Vegas. Elliot Friedman made comments on a Leafs-based podcast talking about Marner. He was asked about, any updates, and he did mention that he expects Vegas to be all over this, that Vegas is always interested in all the top players when one is known to be made available. There's also another report that I've seen too. I think it was Dave Pagnotta that said that he believes that the Leafs have an idea where Marner would go. Now, I don't think they've officially asked him for a formal list. I don't know if this is something that he's actually told them, or if it's just their own opinion of what they think he would do. They could turn out to be wrong, and maybe it doesn't work out, right? I can't say for certainty where that came from, and just know that that was mentioned, and they believe they know at least a few spots that he would be willing to go to and sign. But we've heard from Elliott saying that, his agent, Darren Ferris, is usually pretty adamant about taking his players and his clients to free agency. And that even if he is traded, it doesn't mean he's going to sign an extension. And that could greatly change the value that the Leafs get back in a trade. He had made mention that he'd heard things about the Leafs in Vegas. He made mention of Logan Thompson and Shea Theodore being the main pieces that could go to Toronto in a trade. Of course, this is not so much him saying that they're having conversations or anything like that. He's just saying that that's kind of the belief out there, that might be a type of package that they actually offer at some point, but like he's not saying that they're actually having these conversations right now, or that that's what's actually been discussed. This is just what people that he's talked to seem to be, kind of believing could maybe happen. And he's not wrong. Vegas is all over all the top players. Whenever we've heard, like, look, that's how they got Pietrangelo in free agency. That's how they traded for Mark Stone. That's how they got Jack Eichel. Like, that's just what they do. They are aggressive. They are cutthroat. They want to win the Stanley Cup at all costs every single year. And, well, they've done it once so far. They're going to try to keep doing it. That's just how Kelly McCrimmon, George McPhee, and the owner there, that's how they roll. So, will they be interested in Mitch Marner? I have no doubt they would be. And if they can get Marner for a type of package that would include Shea Theodore and Logan Thompson, I think they'd be all over that. Now, from a cap perspective, I think it'd be challenging for Vegas, just because if you look at right now, they don't even have the money to sign Jonathan Marchessault. So they might have to figure that out. Now, well, theoretically, they kind of do, but it's going to be tight because they do have Robin Lehner, who hasn't played in, I think almost 2 years. His contract has one more year on it. So that's expected to remain on long-term injury reserve, so they can spend that above the cap. So with his contract in long-term injury, they probably can squeeze in Marchessault, but then there's no money left. So if they brought in a guy like Marner, they're going to have to move out an equivalent amount of money or pretty close to it. Theodore and Thompson do not make anywhere near Marner combined. Thompson's on a pretty cheap contract, under $800,000. Theodore's like over $5 million. So that's a start, but they're probably going to have to include another contract or have a separate subsequent deal to shed some money elsewhere. Are you looking to maybe like a Nikolai Waugh or William Karlsson or something else? Would have to happen, or they don't sign Marchessault. That's the other possibility here too. At this point, I know that there's mutual interest from the keep Marchessault. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, it would make a Marner trade less complicated. But Friedman's gone on to say that the caution here that this kind of trade for Marner is going to be complicated. There's no doubt, and there's lots of teams that are probably watching this scenario really closely. We'd like to get a player like that, but at the same time, like cap wise, it's going to be complicated. Will he sign an extension? We don't know that. And will he waive? Again, we don't know. We've heard enough insiders like Sarah Valley say he believes the Leafs are going to push until they convince him to waive, that they can't, bring the full band back next year, so to speak, and it doesn't make sense to trade anybody else. So we will see. It kind of does make sense to trade John Tavares, but I think he'd be even more complicated to consider waiving. I know there's been some rumblings out there about him. Again, he's got 1 year. He's a whole different spot of his career than Marner is. I don't think he goes anywhere. But Marner to Vegas does make sense. Obviously no state tax. They can probably get him a contract a little cheaper than a lot of markets would. It's a fun place to play, always competitive. I don't know if Marner's if he's basically told by the Leafs, like, you got to go, why wouldn't he want to go there, right? So, if they can get themselves a top defenseman like Theodore, another solid goalie in Thompson, and a third piece, if there is a third piece, like, Vegas wouldn't want to offer that much unless Marner signs an extension, but at the same time, they may have to from a cap perspective. So we'll have to see how this goes. But Marner to Vegas makes sense to me. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Is Friedman on to something here? Like I said, he's not saying that this is being discussed. He's just saying that that's what everybody out there seems to think, that Vegas will be all over it. And that's the type of package that would be a starting point for them to have serious conversations. So we'll see where this goes. Could be a while yet before we really have a better indication on where he's going, what the return could be, or if he's even going at all. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.